The day Sloane Merritt wore her scrubs into a Whole Foods after a 12-hour shift was the day she stopped believing that ordinary people defaulted to kindness. She hadn't planned to stop. She'd meant to go straight home, peel off her compression socks, and eat whatever was left in the fridge, probably a sad container of hummus and some crackers that had gone soft. But her sister had texted, asking her to pick up something for their mom's birthday dinner, and Sloane had said yes because she always said yes, even when her feet were screaming and her lower back had that particular burning ache that came from spending 8 hours as hunched over a medication cart. She grabbed a basket near the door and moved through the produce section, slowly, the way you move when every muscle in your body is quietly protesting. Her scrubs were light blue. There was a faint mark near the left pocket. She didn't want to think about what it was. Her hair was still pulled back in the same bun she'd put up at 5:45 that morning, which was now more of a suggestion of a bun than an actual one. She was reaching for a bunch of flowers near the back. Her mom liked sunflowers when she heard it. "Are you seriously touching those with those hands?" She turned. There was a woman standing about 2 feet away, late 40s maybe, wearing a cream-colored blazer that looked like it cost more than Sloane's monthly car payment. She was holding a small bottle of sparkling water and staring at Sloane's hands with an expression that belonged on someone who had just watched a rat run across a kitchen counter. Sloane looked down at her own hands. She'd washed them. She always washed them. She washed her hands so many times in a 12-hour shift that the skin over her knuckles had started to crack in winter. "I washed my hands," Sloane said, keeping her voice even. She'd spent years keeping her voice even. "You work in a hospital." The woman said it the way you'd say you work in a sewer. "You have no idea what you're carrying around." There were other people nearby. A man choosing between 2 types of olive oil. A teenager looking at his phone while standing in front of the refrigerated juices. An older woman with a cart who glanced over and then quickly looked away. Sloane set the sunflowers down. "I follow infection control protocols," she said. "I'm not a hazard to anyone in this store." The woman in the blazer made a short, sharp sound, something between a laugh and a scoff. "That's what they all say." She turned to the flower display and deliberately moved the bundles Sloane had touched to the side, away from herself, like she was clearing contamination. Then she looked back at Sloane with the particular calm of someone who had never once in their life been told no. "Some of us are trying to buy flowers for a dinner party. Maybe you could just," she gestured vaguely toward the door, "come back when you've had a chance to change." Sloane felt it move through her. Not rage, exactly. Something quieter than that, but heavier. The kind of feeling that comes when you realize you are invisible to someone who is looking directly at you. She was 31 years old. She had a nursing degree and a certification in critical care. She had held the hands of people who were dying when their families couldn't be there. She had talked teenagers through panic attacks at 2 in the morning and calculated medication dosages while running on 4 hours of sleep. She had done all of that today, in the last 12 hours, before walking into this store to buy flowers for her mother's birthday. And this woman wanted her to leave and come back in different clothes. Sloane picked up her basket. Her jaw was tight. She was not going to cry in a Whole Foods. She had a rule about that, a hard one, but the back of her throat had gone thick in a way she recognized. She was heading toward the checkout when she heard the click of nails on the polished concrete floor. She felt it before she saw it. That particular shift in a room when something enters that commands attention without trying to. She turned her head. Coming down the main aisle was a dog. Not a small dog, not a pet carrier dog, a Belgian Malinois with a working vest on, moving with the focused, ground-eating stride of an animal that had been trained to cover distance efficiently and without waste. Beside the dog, holding a short lead loosely in one hand, was a man. He was tall, mid-30s maybe. Brown hair, short and slightly overgrown at the sides like he hadn't had time for a haircut in a few weeks. He was wearing jeans and a plain gray shirt, nothing remarkable, except that the way he carried himself was the kind of thing you noticed without being able to immediately explain. Something in the set of his shoulders, the way his eyes moved through the store when he walked in, cataloging exits and people and distance without any of it looking deliberate. Sloane knew that posture. She'd grown up with it. Her uncle had come back from 2 tours with it, and it had never entirely left him, even after 15 years of civilian life. The dog. She could see now that the vest read K9 Unit, the letters in yellow on black, spotted her first. He turned his large square head in her direction and his tail moved once, a single sweep. The man followed the dog's attention. He saw her face. Whatever was written there, she couldn't have said what it was, made him stop walking. "Hey," he said. Just that. Sloane opened her mouth to say she was fine, which was the thing she always said, and instead what came out was, "I'm fine," in a voice that did not sound fine at all. The man tilted his head slightly. The dog had sat down beside him without being told to, which she found oddly steadying the quiet competence of the animal. "Caspar," the man said, and she understood this was the dog's name, Free. The dog stood, crossed the few feet between them, and pressed his large warm head against Sloane's hip. She looked down at him. She did not cry, but it was a near thing. "I'm Beckett," the man said, moving to stand nearby. Not crowding, just present. "That's Caspar. He's very opinionated about people who look like they've had a bad day." "It wasn't a bad day," Sloane said. She scratched the top of Caspar's head, and the dog pressed into her hand with full commitment. The shift was fine. It was the last 4 minutes. Beckett waited. He had that stillness about him that some people confuse with being quiet, but it wasn't the same thing. It was the stillness of someone who knew how to wait. She told him what had happened. Not dramatically, just the facts of it. The woman, the flowers, the gesture of moving them aside. When she finished, she felt slightly embarrassed, which was familiar. Being embarrassed about having feelings in response to things that warranted feelings was a particular specialty of hers. Beckett was quiet for a moment. Then, "Is she still here?" Sloane almost laughed. "You're not going to do anything." "I'm not going to do anything," he agreed, in a tone that was so completely neutral it was almost funny. "I just want to know where to point Caspar. He's a K9 unit dog," Sloane said. "You can't just point him at people." "He's retired," Beckett said. "He mostly does what he wants now." Caspar, as if demonstrating this point, turned his head toward the flower section and made a sound low in his throat. Beckett looked in that direction. The woman in the cream blazer was still there, selecting a bundle of white roses with the focused energy of someone who had already forgotten the interaction entirely, which was its own kind of statement, Sloane thought. The forgetting was always the thing. "Come on," Beckett said. He said it easily, like it was obvious. "Where?" Sloane asked. "You came in for something. What was it?" She stared at him for a second. "Sunflowers. For my mom." He picked up her drop basket from where she'd set it down near the end cap. "Then, let's get sunflowers." She followed him, mostly because she didn't know what else to do, and also because Caspar was still beside her, and the weight of the dog's presence against her leg was more comforting than she would have expected. They went back to the flower section. The woman in the blazer looked up when they approached. Her eyes moved to Beckett, to the dog in his K9 vest, to Beckett again. Something shifted in her expression, a recalibration. Whatever she'd been carrying, she set carefully aside and became suddenly very interested in the roses. Sloane reached for the sunflowers. She picked out the fullest bunch, the brightest ones, the ones she'd been reaching for when this whole thing started. Beckett stood beside her, saying nothing, occupying the specific and unhurried space of someone who belonged exactly where he was. Caspar sat at his left side, massive and alert, his intelligent eyes watching the woman in the blazer with a calm professional attention that was somehow more unsettling than aggression would have been. The woman cleared her throat. She started and then stopped. Sloane looked at her. There is a particular kind of discomfort that comes from being seen clearly by someone you've just treated badly. It tends to produce either doubling down or collapse, and which one depends entirely on the character of the person experiencing it. Sloane had seen both, in various configurations, in various hallways and waiting rooms over the years. This woman produced a third option, which was more interesting. She looked at the sunflowers in Sloane's hand, and then at the vest on Caspar, and then at Beckett's face, and something in her own face cracked slightly open. "I apologize," she said. The words came out stiff, but they came out. "What I said was, I was rude, and it wasn't right." Sloane studied her for a moment. She wasn't someone who accepted apologies automatically. She thought there was a certain dishonesty in doing that, in saying it's fine when what you meant was I acknowledge that you've said words. But she could tell when something was meant, even imperfectly, and this was meant. "Thank you," Sloane said. "Simple, clean." The woman nodded and walked away toward the checkout, and that was that. Sloane stood for a moment with her sunflowers and her basket, and a dog's warm head pressed against her leg. "You didn't have to do that," she said to Beckett. "Do what?" He was looking at the flower display like he was genuinely considering buying something. "Stand there." She searched for the word. "Present." He shrugged, a small one, barely there. Caspar wanted sunflowers anyway. She looked at the dog. Caspar looked back at her with the serenity of a creature who had decided she was worth his attention, which was its own kind of thing. She paid for the flowers at checkout, while Beckett stood nearby with Caspar and talked to the cashier about whether the Malinois was friendly, to which Beckett said selectively, and Caspar did his single tail sweep again as if to confirm. Outside, the late afternoon had turned golden the way it does sometimes in late September, the light going sideways and warm across everything, and Sloane stood on the sidewalk with her grocery bag and felt the particular lightness that comes when something heavy unexpectedly lifts. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Yeah, how long were you in?" He didn't ask how she knew. 12 years, he said. "Got out 2 years ago." He looked at Caspar. "We got out at the same time." She nodded. She understood that sentence to contain more than it said. "I'm a nurse," she said, which she knew was obvious from the scrubs, but felt like the right thing to say anyway. 12-hour shifts. I've been doing it for 7 years. Beckett looked at her directly. Not with the vague general regard of someone listening politely, but with the kind of focused attention that comes from training yourself to actually see what's in front of you. "That's a long time," he said. "It doesn't feel long," she said. "Most days." She looked down at Caspar. "Some days it does." There was a silence that wasn't uncomfortable. The kind that happens between people who have both spent time in environments that required them to be quiet and functional under pressure. "We should do this again sometime," Beckett said finally. The grocery store. Very romantic. She laughed, a real one, the kind that comes up before you decide whether to let it. "I don't usually meet people like this." "Yeah?" He reached into his pocket and came out with a phone. "Is that okay?" She gave him her number. She did it without second-guessing it, which was not normally how she operated, but Caspar was looking at her with what she could only describe as encouragement. They went separate ways in the parking lot. She sat in her car for a moment before starting it, the sunflowers bright and ridiculous in the passenger seat, and thought about the woman in the blazer and the way her face had opened when she apologized. And how that was the thing nobody told you about working in healthcare. That you spent years absorbing other people's worst moments and their worst versions of themselves, holding space for all of it without ever really being asked if you had the capacity. She drove to her parents' house. Her mom was in the kitchen. Her dad was in the backyard doing something with the grill that he didn't actually need her help with. Her sister was already there, setting the table, her nephew running in circles around the dining room for no apparent reason, as 5-year-olds do. She put the sunflowers in a vase. Her mom held them for a moment first, the way she always did with flowers, like they deserved that. "You look tired," her mom said, setting the vase on the table. Not critically, just with the particular attentiveness of someone who had spent 30 years paying attention to Sloane's face. "I'm okay," Sloane said. Her mom looked at her for a moment longer. Then, "There's something different, good different or bad different." Her mom smiled. "I'll let you know later." Dinner was the kind of ordinary, warm, loud thing that Sloane's family did well. Everyone talking at once, her nephew eventually falling asleep under the table, her dad making everyone try a sauce he'd been developing that was either very good or very much an acquired taste, depending on who you asked. Her sister refilled everyone's water. Someone put music on low in the background. Sloane sat at the table with people she loved and ate food and felt the sunflowers, bright and oversized and slightly theatrical in the way sunflowers always are, from across the room. Her phone buzzed once. "Caspar wants to know if you made it home okay." "This is Beckett. The dog can't text." She set her phone down on the table and didn't answer right away, not because she wasn't going to, but because she was still at dinner with her family and her nephew had woken up from under the table and was now demanding cake with the absolute conviction of a person who has never once been told no. She answered later, after cake, after her sister left with her nephew, strapped into his car seat with a ring of frosting still around his mouth, after her dad had put the grill stuff away and her mom was rinsing the vase in the kitchen. We made it, she typed. Tell Casper the sunflowers were a hit. The response came back in under a minute. He says of course they were. He has very good taste. She put her phone in her pocket and went to help her mom dry the dishes, the kitchen warm and bright against the dark outside the window, and thought about how strange it was. The way a day could go from one thing to another entirely, how a few minutes of cruelty from a stranger could sit in your chest like a stone, and how just as unexpectedly something could come along and dissolve it. Not because the world was fair, it wasn't. She knew that better than most. But because sometimes, right when you needed it, the world sent you a person who knew how to be present, and a dog who pressed his head against your hip and decided without any further deliberation that you were worth staying beside. That, she thought, rinsing a pot and handing it to her mom, was enough. Tonight, that was enough.